Did you ever hear about the war between Iowa and Missouri? Or that the Carolinas once touched the Pacific Ocean? Did you know that the names Kansas and Arkansas don't have anything to do with each other? And finally, here's a brain teaser. It comes from, looks like August 28th, 1939. See if you can answer this one. There are 8 states and 2 territories, which are spelled with only 4 different letters each. It's kind of a trick question. See if you can figure that one out. I'll give you the answer at the end. Welcome back. I'm Jeff Hicks, curator of the Strange As It Seems archives and grandnephew of John Hicks, who created Strange As It Seems back in the late 1920s. For today's episode, I came across this folder, fascinating folder in the Strange As It Seems archives, entitled States and Counties, Miscellaneous. Let's take a dive in. So when I open up the folder, the first story I come to, which is pretty fascinating, is about a boundary dispute between Iowa and Missouri in 1839. I guess the trail of this starts in February 5th, 1942. My great uncle John Hicks writes the Iowa State Historical Society with a letter that says, in doing research work for Strange As It Seems, my nationally syndicated newspaper feature, I have come across an interesting item concerning the history of Iowa as concerned by the Honey War. I understand that the militia of Missouri and that of Iowa once marched upon the other in a dispute over the boundary lines between the 2 states. So he sends this to the State Department of History, and he gets a letter back from my fellow curator, Ora Williams, the curator for the State Department of History in Des Moines, Iowa, a job that very likely would not exist today, thanks to our good friends over at Doge. Anyway, here is a letter from Ora to my granduncle on February 10th of 1942. Dear Sir, your letter addressed to the Iowa State Historical Society came into my hands as curator of this department of the state which has custody of our historical records. In the main, you have stated the general facts as to the so-called Honey War, which was the border conflict between Missouri and Iowa in the early days of statehood. And I should say, being that my grandmother was from Iowa and my grandfather was from Missouri, it was actually, northern Missouri is pronounced Missouri, so I apologize for that. Between Missouri and Iowa in the early days of statehood, the designation of a honey war is quite likely not justified. It came about through the fanciful notion of somebody that the trouble along the border arose over Missouri people coming into Iowa to cut bee trees and get the honey. This is only part of the story. There was a strip of Iowa territory at that time claimed by Missouri, about 6 or 7 miles wide all along the border due to the misinterpretation of the terms of a treaty between the Indians and the government. When Iowa became a state and claimed all of this strip, the officials along the northern border of Missouri counties insisted upon jurisdiction and a collection of taxes, making arrests, etc. Out of this grew the threatened armed conflict. The governor of Iowa organized a company of militia, roughly armed, and sent them to Van Buren County, Iowa, to take possession of the disputed territory. The governor of Missouri sent a similar group to Mercer County, Missouri, for the same purpose. While the 2 pretended armies were facing each other and making grave threats, the governors of the 2 states entered into an agreement, ratified by the legislatures, which finally sent the whole controversy to the U.S. Supreme Court, where it was decided largely in Iowa's favor. And here's the fact that my grandma Elsie published in the 1950s, but pretty fascinating, that the boundary dispute between and Missouri, caused by the Indian Treaty, was not settled completely until 1939, 100 years later. Strange as it seems. You know, an Arkansas state trooper pulls over a pickup truck driver and he says, "Hey, you got any ID?" And the truck driver says, "About what?" So aside from that, it looks like all this kind of started in 1930. When my granduncle John Hicks published this one on October 4th, 1930, which is, "What do you know about the United States?" And it looks like all of these were really coming from letters. People who wrote in all these strange and unusual facts from the states. Love this letter from J.W. Wilson, attorney at law from Falfurrias, Texas, July 22nd, 1930. He says, "Dear Sir, since the national sport seems to be changing from baseball to sending in a strange fact, I wish to submit one for your approval. The county of Cimarron in Oklahoma is the only county, I think, that is touched by 4 other states. Cimarron County is touched on the north by Kansas and Colorado, on the west by New Mexico, and on the south by Texas. Of course, I have no idea whether you can use this or not, but I shall watch the paper and see." We have this letter written in June of 1930 from James Marion Tadlock, which looks like a John Hancock signature, does it not? In the Humble Times of June 1st of your page, I note that you say there is one state in the United States that touches 8 other states. Can you name it? Actually, I can go one better. There are 2 such states, and I can name both of them. Can you? They are Tennessee, which touches Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Missouri, which of course touches Tennessee, along with Iowa, Illinois, Kentucky, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. Now, what do you think of that? I can tell you also, there is but one that has 7 states touching it, and that is Kentucky. Lots that have 6. Fascinating. Reminds me of the engineers surveying along the border between New Hampshire and Maine. Stopped in to see the farmer one day and said, "Hey, by the way, you're no longer in Maine. You're actually in New Hampshire." And the farmer said, "Oh, thank God. I don't think I could take another one of those Maine winters." And then a couple letters here on the same fact. This one from, looks like a Eugene Hobeck in August of 1930. It says there's only one point in the U.S. common to 4 states. And of course, also from July of 1930, we have from Narf Eldir from Visalia, California. There's only one place in the United States where $1 may be placed, so that 1/4 of it is in each of 4 states. As you guys probably already know, that's the junction of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. This on Quaker Oats Company stationery from Chicago, a salesman by the name of W.G. Spence, who wrote in, "There's one state in the Union that has no counties." Do you know that? They have parishes. It's the state of Louisiana. What differentiates a zoo in Louisiana from any other zoo? Well, in Louisiana, they have a description of the animal along with a recipe. Interesting facts as well, like Pensacola is farther west than Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. That's kind of an interesting fact. And I love this one. This came on August 1st of 1930 from Dabney's, Virginia, from a W.D. Etfield, it looks like, or Enfield. Can't quite read that. But there is a part of the continental United States which cannot be reached from the United States except by water. And it's not an island. It's the northernmost part of Minnesota. And apparently a mistake was made in surveying the boundary line between U.S. and Canada. And this part of Minnesota can only be reached from the U.S. by going across Lake of the Woods or by land through Canada. This was such a fun fact that it looks like right after my grandfather Ernest, Sr., had died in a plane crash. So it had been June 11th of 1949 she published that fact as well about the most northerly part of the United States in Minnesota. How do you know when you're staying in a hotel in Mississippi? Well, when you call the front desk and say, "Hey, I got a leak in my sink," the front desk says, "Go right ahead." Here's an interesting fact. The lowest point in Wyoming, 3,100 feet, Belle Fourche River, Wyoming, is almost 10 times higher than the highest point in Florida. Strange as it seems. Here's another brain teaser. See if you can get this one. Which states of the U.S. were named for English kings? Interesting. And I'll do one better. There's a couple more states that were named for kings and queens. See if you can get that. I'll also give the answer to that at the end of this episode. Interesting here. Did you know that Colorado was originally meant to be Idaho, and Arizona was once meant to be Colorado? Fascinating. When the territory that is now Colorado was being admitted to the Union, it came very nearly being named Idaho, because the name Colorado had been proposed by a California senator for the new state later admitted as Arizona. The Colorado representative actually favored the name Idaho, but further discussion of the proposed name brought up the suggestion that the state be named Colorado because of the Colorado River. Senator Gwynn, California, objected because he wanted to name Arizona's territory Colorado when it became a state. His objection was overruled, and of course Colorado became Colorado and Arizona became Arizona. Strange as it seems. You know, an Alaskan was once on trial and the prosecutor leaned in and said, "Where were you on the night of October through April?" Here's an interesting fact. I don't know if you caught a recent episode where I talked about the intense rivalry between Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln. Kind of a strange fact that we talked about in maybe an episode or two back, where the capital of Nebraska was originally going to be named after Stephen Douglas, who is the quote-unquote father of Nebraska. It got basically declined or didn't pass in the state legislature. 10 years later, it was named for his most bitter rival, Lincoln. And here's another interesting Lincoln and Douglas fact. Lincoln and Douglas counties in the state of Washington were named on the same day in honor of two of the most intense political rivals in American history. Those two counties are separated by one county, Grant County, in Washington. Here's an interesting fact about the King Ranch, which apparently my grandfather, Ernest Hicks, I think he was kind of a big bet. He used to place a lot of bets in the races. He got a subscription to the Washington Jockey Club about horse racing. But an interesting fact in the Washington Jockey Club bulletin that the King Ranch, noted for its cattle and purebred horses, larger than the state of Rhode Island. I think today it's still the largest ranch in the U.S., but interestingly enough, it wouldn't even place in the top 50 ranches in Australia. Crazy. Here we go. The first 3 years as a state, Oklahoma grew as much as did Louisiana in its first 100 years. Crazy. I love this little cartoon drawing. Oklahoma or bust. Here's the fact about the Carolinas that I mentioned at the top of the episode. A group of 8 noblemen, headed by the famous Lord Clarendon and Ink Shaftesbury, were granted on March 24th, 1663, a tract called the Province of Carolina after King Charles. There's one of the kings that was named for a state. Carolina is really Charles' land. Extended on June 30th, 1665, it included the present North and South Carolinas and Georgia, and in theory stretched westward all the way to the Pacific. So at one time, the Carolinas actually touched the Pacific, strange as it seems. This one kind of a little somber, and I'm not sure would be appreciated by today's Native American tribe, as it starts with gone but not forgotten, and certainly the Indian tribes of America are certainly not forgotten. But did you know that 26 of the United States are named from Indians or Indian words? If you can't think of them all, send me a comment below and I'll give you guys all 26 states that were named for Indians. And the amazing thing about this fact to me is that there's only one state in the U.S. that is actually named for an American, which obviously is Washington, while 26 are named, probably more rightly so, for Indians. And of course, speaking of Indian names of states, Kansas and Arkansas. Here's the explanation behind the other fact at the top of the hour. There is no connection between Kansas and Arkansas. Crazy. Both have completely different origins. Arkansas is a Gallicized form of the Indian word Ugapa or Quapa, meaning those going downstream or with the current. Kansas, on the other hand, was named after a river of the same name, which was the name of the Indian tribe in the area, Kansa. Strange as it seems. You know what Arkansas's state bird is? Mosquitoes. How about this? This one's stolen from one of the competitors of John Hicks back in the 1930s, another comic strip called This Curious World. Someone else who tried to take on Ripley and Ripley's Believe It or Not. But mottos of the states of the United States employ 7 different languages. Crazy. There's one motto in Greek, one in Latin, one in Spanish, one in English, one in American Indian, of course, one in Italian, and one in French. Strange as it seems. So that brings us to just about the end of this episode on states and counties for Strange as it seems. We have a couple of brain teasers to solve. The first being, can you name the states named for English kings? We mentioned one of them. We also mentioned the second at the same time. Don't know if you caught it, but the two states are Georgia and Carolina. There's two other states named for kings and queens, although not exactly directly. There's Louisiana, which was kind of a bastardized form of Louis, right? King Louis of France. So Louisiana was named for a French king, and another state was named for a British queen. Can you name it? Virginia, named for the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. Crazy. And then the final brain teaser that's left for us, which was a little bit of a trick question, were there 8 states and 2 territories with only 4 distinct letters in them? Keep in mind, this was 1939, right? Those 2 territories are now also states. This at the time, strange as it seems, was when there was only 48 states in the Union. But all 10 states now that have 4 different letters: Alabama, Alaska, Hawaii, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Mississippi, Ohio, Tennessee, and Utah. Of course, including the 2 territories, Hawaii and Alaska, that are now U.S. states. Thanks so much for joining. Enjoyed having you here today for this episode of Strange as It Seems. If you like content like this from the archives, we have old radio shows. I'm going to be publishing another short film that was published in the 1930s or produced in the 1930s here on Mark Twain in the next day or two. Stay tuned. But hit the bell to subscribe, like, follow, send a comment in, and we'll see you next time here at Strange as It Seems.